Welcome back to another episode of Free the Plant, Free the People, presented by BluRok Farms. We talk everything and anything cannabis and cannabis related, specifically in the industry itself. My name is LeVar. I'm your host, and today's episode, we're going to be talking about social equity and different social equity programs and how it's the purpose of them and how we can create more room for exclusivity for us all. So let's get right into it. Social equity. Social equity has a lot of different meanings and a lot of different interpretations depending on the space that you're talking about. Today, we're going to be specifically talking about the cannabis industry. So I want to give you a definition that I came up with, or that I came up with in association with other resources that kind of defines it in a palatable manner. So social equity in the cannabis industry refers to the commitment and efforts made to ensure that individuals and communities who are disproportionately affected by the war on drugs have a fair chance to participate in and benefit from the emerging legal cannabis industry. It recognizes the historical injustices such as over-policing and over-incarceration of marginalized communities, for cannabis-related offenses. Social equity programs aim to address their disparities by providing opportunities for impact individuals to participate in the cannabis industry through various means such as licensing priority, training programs, and financial assistance. So let's get into that a little bit. We all know about the war on drugs and how it affected a lot of people, not just black and brown people, but it affected a lot of people across the board. But when you break down the numbers and you look at the data, black and brown people were incarcerated at some stats say about 4 times, and in some states it ranges. So some states it was more egregious, in other states it still was occurring, but it wasn't as prolific. So the data that I came across gave the ranges about 4 to 8 times the incarceration rate. And then so what that's saying is basically that you have two people, a black guy, you have a black guy and a white guy. They both get arrested they both are consuming cannabis. The black guy is 4 times more likely to get arrested for the same action as that white counterpart. And then when you take it even further, let's say both of them were arrested on the same for consumption of cannabis or possession of cannabis. The black individual or the minority, it could be brown, Asian, there are several different minorities, but the minority would be, the incarceration time would be significantly longer. Some cases 2 to 4 times longer for the same one-to-one comparison. So the impact that the minority and the black and brown community faced in regards to the war on drugs had us incarcerated at higher rates and for longer sentences. Let's talk about what that impact of being incarcerated for does. It significantly decreases your financial capacity. And what I mean by that is your ability to make money has decreased significantly. You cannot work. You're in jail. So your ability to save, your ability to create generational wealth, your ability to improve on your credit score or to show credit utilization is all negated because you're in jail. So you can't build your credit. You can't acquire capital, which once you get out, significantly inhibits your capacity to regain that and even to move forward. Jobs are less likely to hire you because of that conviction. In some states, even in the cannabis space, if you have a felony conviction for related to cannabis, you're not even eligible to work in the legal or the commercial cannabis space. So when you take all those components together, it makes it very difficult, or it makes the barriers even higher for minorities to get into the cannabis space. It's already hard to get into the cannabis space as it is, one, because of the fact that it's not federally legal. The other aspect is very capital intensive. It takes a lot of capital to get a cannabis related business going and started and to reach the point of profitability and sustainability. So when you take those factors into account, that it takes a lot of capital to get into the space, and if you're a black or brown and you were arrested or you were in environments where the war on drugs was prolific, your chances of having increase in capital or having the capital needed to get those businesses started is relatively low. When you take into the racial components of redlining for black people, discrimination when it comes to banks, and the housing market. The housing market and investing in land and houses is one of the easiest ways to create generational wealth and to create capital long withstanding, because you can take equity out on that house, or capital, or equity out on that house once you own it or that land, and then use that to start your businesses. But again, with racism, for black and brown peoples, that is less likely to be for us to have. A lot of us don't have land to borrow equity on to get the cash needed to get these businesses started. Again, back to the example, if you were incarcerated, where are you going to get that capital from? And so that's what you're going to need to get into the space. So the whole point of the whole point of a lot of the social equity programs, specifically in the cannabis space, was to knock down those barriers. So let's take California, for example. If you apply and you are granted or are deemed you meet the requirements for social equity, one of the things that they did was allow for waiving of the licensing fees. So you don't need that capital to get the license to be able to start your business. Now, there are some issues and underlining problems with that, but I just wanted to bring that up as an example of ways that programs can or were designed to help. A lot of these programs aren't going far enough, and they're not taking the totality of the entire picture. Some of them are just doing expungements. So if you were arrested for cannabis possession and it's not a nonviolent charge, then you can get your charges expunged, basically meaning like as if they never happened. Now, the time that you spend in jail, that can't be wiped away. The financial capacity that you lost as a result of being locked up also can't be wiped away. So to me, when they're creating these social equity programs, they need to keep that in mind and say, well, okay, yes, let's definitely expunge your record so you have a better chances of potentially getting a job in the space or a job in any industry. But let's also think about figuring out ways to compensate for the capital that they lost. So in some states, they are waiving, and going back to California, they did have this program where it was basically, in order to get a license, it was a match. So social equity, there was two pools in essence. Social equity was one pool, and normal commercial licensing was another pool. And in order for a commercial license to get a commercial entrepreneur to get a license, a social equity applicant had to get a license. So it was a one-to-one. And so that way, you kind of keep the market available for social equity applicants in a way. Also with that, they had this where you can kind of partner up with a non-social social equity applicant or an investor, and you would be the owner of the company. You'd have to at least have 51% of the company. I think it might have been 55, but it was at least you had to be the majority owner. So at least 51% or more. And basically the investor would help you either provide capital, you can get a building, and that investor would pay the lease for a period of time to help those social equity applicants be able to get into the space. Because let's think about it from the entire process. Okay, so you were arrested, you went to jail, recreation, medical came through into your state, so they developed a social equity program. In that social equity program, you got your charges expunged. So that's a benefit. That's great. You needed that as the first step to be able to get into the industry. Once that is expunged, you can apply for a social equity license or a grant, in essence, get a waiver for the license. So then you fill the requirements, you got to fill out the paperwork, you submit that, you get your social equity license. With that, you can partner with an investor because they want to get into the space. So you have the license, they want to get into the space. That's your ask, or that's your value add. They provide the capital, or they provide the building with 6 months to a year worth of where you don't have to pay rent for that space, as well as help with the build out. Then once you get into the build out phase, you begin operations, you begin production, and you go. That's how you would imagine that it would work, or that's how I believe, some of them thought it would work. There were a lot of issues with that in cases where those investors were putting a lot of loopholes into the agreement, so that basically it was causing the social equity applicants to fail. That investor takes over the business, and now they have the license and a complete ownership of the business. So there were little loopholes like that were in different programs throughout multiple states. But I wanted to touch on specifically in New Mexico, where we live. Right now, they say we have a social equity program, but it's really not a social equity program. The micro business licensing is not a social equity program, because social equity is specifically to help those that were affected by the war on drugs. The micro business licensing is available to any and everybody. So go to an example of, you have a black man that was arrested for cannabis consumption, that's now trying to get into the industry, and he's applying for the micro business license because he, she, or they are applying for the micro business license because the capital that they have can really only fit that structure or that tier of licensing for here in New Mexico. Okay, so you apply for that. Now on the other side, you have a white counterpart that was not arrested for the consumption of cannabis. And as a result of not being white privilege, they have access to more capital. That's a fact. When you look at venture capitalism, angel investors, or private or business loans, black people, minorities get the lowest amount of percentage of that capital needed to start businesses. And to be honest, black women get the least. They have it the hardest when it comes to acquiring those capital needed from venture capitalists, angel investors, so forth and so on. So back to the example, that white counterpart has more access to capital, but still applying for the micro business license because that capital will go further with a smaller license or a lower license, and then they can slowly build their way up to a higher provider license. So now you have a white individual that has a lot of access to capital that's applying for the same license as this micro business that was convicted, and minority that doesn't have access to a lot of capital. Now you put them both into the market, the capital is going to get that white person to a position where they're more likely to be able to succeed. So to me, it's not evening the playing field in that regard of allowing those that have been affected by the war on drugs the leg up or the opportunity to be as profitable and sustainable as their white counterparts. So to me, that's not really a social equity program. Now, I don't want to take anything away from what they did, because it did help a lot of people get into the space. But when you look at it long term, most people, I think, would agree with me that the micro business providers aren't going to be able to last in the space long term. It is for all the entrepreneurs out there that are listening to this podcast, that are thinking about getting into the space or that are already into the space, I would not plan on using the micro business license as a long-term goal. It should be a baby step, basically a step to get you a license, and then slowly build your way up to get a full provider license, because that's really the only way that you're going to be sustainable long-term, is having that full provider license. Or I don't even think having a vertically integrated micro business is going to be profitable and long-term. Now, if you're definitely trying to create generational wealth, that's not going to be a sustainable model. So I think that investing dollars into these communities to allowing them to get the spaces is one way that we can improve. The other way is we need a social equity program here in New Mexico. There's a lot of black and brown people that need licenses. And that look was, the black population is not that high, but it's still significant enough that we need a program. There's a lot of brown people in this state, a lot of indigenous people as well that can benefit from this industry and having a social equity program. So those are things that I think that are important to add into this space, specifically for New Mexico. And a way that they can look is there's a lot of space that the city owns already, like land that the city owns that could be either converted to outdoor or indoor cultivation, manufacturing, or retail spaces that the city could lease out to individuals that fit the social equity requirements, black, brown, or indigenous minority group that has been affected by the war on drugs, that has been incarcerated by cannabis possession, or that just has been impacted by it. If you live in a community that has been heavily police enforced for the war on drugs, that also decreases your capacity even if you weren't arrested for capital gain. So back to the example that I was saying is, yeah, the city could lease out these spaces, so they're not giving it out for free, but they can have it in a way where, let's say, the first 6 months you don't have to pay the lease or the rent on the lease, and that's tracked onto the back end of that year or to the back end of your 3-year lease, so that you have opportunity to use the money that you would have used for rent to use for the build out of your facility. They also should have. They do say they have a loan program in New Mexico, but not a lot of people, specifically black and brown people, as far as I've seen and the research that I've done, are really getting it. And they ran into an issue of not having enough funds, which doesn't make sense to me with all the tax money that they got from last year, from the first year of adult use. A portion of that should have been allocated towards these programs that I'm talking about, or towards the loan repayment program as well. But those are just a couple of things that I think New Mexico could do to implement to help increase inclusivity for all. Like I said, especially with the high indigenous population that we have here, this is an industry that can give them the ability to create generational wealth for themselves as well as their family. There's a Pew study that came out this year that indicates that the cannabis industry by 2030 should be a $100 billion industry. That indicates that there is a lot of money in this space, in this industry, and that money should be redirected towards those that have been affected by it, as well as those that need it the most. And right now, that's not what is currently being done in the space. And the other thing that I want to bring up, because I don't want to just ramble on all day about this, we'll probably have another episode following up on this, seeing the changes that have been made in the New Mexico social equity aspect, as well as what's going on nationwide. And hopefully we'll have some guests. I would love to have Nina Parks on here, Lenice Martin from Hood Incubator, and Nina Parks is a member of Supernova Women and the Equity Trade. Or Ramon Garcia, who's a member of the Equity Trade as well, which is a California-based company, or not California, or California-based organization that is trying to expand nationwide, and they are. But there's different things that I would like to have them come on and discuss with as well. But one of the stats that I wanted to bring up that kind of indicates the need for social equity programs across the board is the fact of entrepreneurship or non-white executives in the cannabis space as of 2022. If you look at just women, non-white women executives in the cannabis space, in 2017 it was 26.9%. In 2019 it was 36.8%, which showed an increase. And then in 2021 it dropped down to 22.1%. And then in 2022 it's at 23.1%. But that is still lower than the 2017, which indicates that it should be moving up if these social equity programs are working in the manner that they say they should be. Now, when you look at racial minorities, non-white executives, in that aspect, 2017 it was 16.8%, 2019 it was 28%, and 2021 is 13.1%, excuse me, and in 2022 it's at 12%. So that again is also decreasing, which is indicating again that these social equity programs, there's some gaps that need to be filled, and those are the things that I think some of the suggestions that I mentioned would help implement that. What I also would like to kind of end on is I would really like these social equity programs to instead of pushing minority entrepreneurs into delivery, which is it is the lowest barrier of entry to get into the cannabis space because it requires the least amount of capital, but it's also the easiest portion of the industry to be phased out and moved out, especially when these big corporations come in. So I would like those social equity programs to really focus on the cultivation side, cultivation and the manufacturing, because those two, you can really develop a brand that brand can take you to tremendous heights. And specifically with cultivation, you can't do anything without the plant. Everything on the end is based off what you get from the plant, outside of those auxiliary businesses that aren't plant touching. So that's something just to keep in mind is I think they should be cultivation focused, manufacturer focused, also do delivery. I'm not saying that should stop, but I don't think that should be a lot. If you look at a lot of the other states, delivery is the main one that they push onto minority entrepreneurs, and I believe the reason for that is because again, that's the easiest space for them to be phased out. So I know I talked a lot about it, and I kind of went a lot of different places. But as you can see, I'm very passionate about this subject, and I want to see more of us, more people of color, more people, more women specifically as well, getting into the space and increasing those numbers. Those numbers should be a reflection of what we see in the industry as consumers and what we see as just everyday individuals that live in this country. That's the kind of industry we want to see, is a diverse, reflective industry that is reflective of the country. So let me know what you think about the suggestions that I made in regards to social equity in the cannabis industry. Let me know if there's any people that you think I should interview, like Shauna Brown. I would love to interview her as well. She's a very integral component in social equity in New Mexico, as well as Rosemary. So yeah, give me some suggestions on who we should talk to. Give me some suggestions on how you think the social equity program should look, or if you think there's even a need for it. We definitely appreciate the conversation. We love the discussion. And thank you for listening to another episode of Free the Plant, Free the People. Please make sure to subscribe, like, and comment below. And follow us on Instagram, as well as follow BluRok Farms, which presented this podcast for you today. So take it easy.